So hello and welcome to another video. Before anyone criticises the obvious clickbait title, yes, the Canon EOS-R was launched in 2018, not 2019, so it's a little bit unfair to call it the best camera of 2019. And the truth is, there's obviously a lot better cameras out there depending on what you're prepared to pay. However, I still think this is a fantastic option for the vast majority of people. But we'll get into those reasons a little bit later on. The Canon EOS-R was first launched at the end of 2018, and when it came out, I think it's fair to say that it came out to pretty lukewarm reviews. Even in my initial video, when I first picked up the camera, I was a little bit sceptical over whether it would even replace my 5D Mark III. But the truth is, it has done, and it's been a great addition to the cameras that I use, in particular for video, which I was quite surprised about. As it's coming up to Christmas, as we're moving into 2020, there's a lot on the horizon for Canon, and I think now is a fantastic time for people to be looking at the EOS-R, and I think it has kind of taken a few people by surprise. So let's start looking at some of the good things and the things that aren't so good. So I picked up the Canon EOS-R when it first came out, and it came as standard with a 24-105 RF lens. And one of the first things that struck me about the camera was how good that kit lens is. The 24-105 was fantastic, really sharp, really enjoyed using it, and it's the kind of focal length that I'll use on a regular basis for walking around the streets, for landscape kind of work. That 24-105 is such a versatile lens. But in recent months I've picked up the 24-70 f2.8, and it is easily one of the best lenses that I've ever used. It's fantastically sharp. Having that continual f2.8 is just fantastic. The image stabilization works really well, and it is a fantastic lens, there's no doubting about that. However, that's a really big indication over what Canon think of this EOS-R body. The fact that they're prepared to invest in this RF mount, the fact that they've clearly got a roadmap of lenses that they think are going to work really well with cameras like this, because there obviously will be new versions to come. And things like the new 70-200, even though it's had the focusing issues and things, will be a fantastic addition in particular to this camera, because one of the beauties about this camera is the fact that it's relatively lightweight. It's relatively small, but the ergonomics are fantastic, and even with the 70-200 lens on it, it's going to feel comfortable in the hand, not like the previous, where if you had like a 5D Mark III with the previous generation 70-200, all of a sudden it becomes quite cumbersome, and you can really feel that weight that you're carrying around. So I'm predicting that the 70-200 will fit really well with this form factor. But the actual ergonomics of this camera, the feel, just everything about it, the way that you can get straight to the menus, some of the kind of button placement and everything feels really good, really intuitive. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed over the last 12 months is pretty much anyone I hand the camera to. So if I'm asking someone to get some like behind the scenes shots or something like that, it's really intuitive to them. They can almost kind of know what they're doing straight away, and there's nothing too intimidating there. Whereas when I've picked up Sony cameras and things like that in the past, it's just not quite as intuitive, it's just not quite as comfortable. So they did a fantastic job with actually designing the body and the look and feel of it, and I think that goes a long way as well, in particular for those that have never used like a full frame mirrorless camera before. One of the other fantastic features about the EOS-R are some of the simple things that Canon have done, which, you know, pretty much every other manufacturer should be looking to do the same. So things like adding a fully articulating tilt screen. The touchscreen features on it are fantastic, but having that actual fully articulating screen in this day and age is a bit of a no-brainer, and I still can't understand why some of the manufacturers don't go for the fully articulating screen. And I know that there'll be certain compromises with kind of size and form factor and things, but I think it's almost a bit of a given in this day and age when things like vlogging is so prevalent that you need a screen that's actually usable, and this screen's been fantastic. One of the other strong points with this particular camera has been the EVF as well. The EVF works really well Previously, I'd always kind of gone on about the Fuji EVFs being fantastic, but I think Canon are definitely catching up with them with this one. I think it's been a really good addition to this camera. So little features like that they could have kind of scrimped and saved on, but they chose not to, I think has worked really well for this camera. There are other things that Canon have tried to do as well, which I think is really impressive, but maybe hasn't worked as well. And that is, for instance, the actual touch bar. Now, I'd be interested to hear if any other EOS-R owners out there actually use a touch bar, because I haven't come across anyone yet that does. So, you know, it's one of those features that's great in principle, nice that they're thinking ahead, but maybe not so practical. And I'd be keen to see if they go back to using a joystick in the future. Another feature that they introduced that I thought was really cool was having the control dial on the lenses. Also, if you're using the EF mounts as well, some of the EF mounts will have a control dial on as well. And that just allows you to customize that ring there, so you can change it. So if you want to change ISO or anything like that, you've got it there on the lens, which is great in principle, and I really like the thinking behind it. But the amount of times that I found myself knocking that and inadvertently changing things like the ISO, it just, I don't know, it kind of like, you know, it's hit and miss for me. I don't think it's the most, you know, the best use that they could have had with that. But it's nice to see that Canon are thinking ahead. One of the other kind of real big benefits of this camera came just a few months back when Canon released a new firmware update for it. And if you've been looking at this camera, the likelihood is you would have come across information about the firmware update, because it basically took it from a pretty mediocre camera to something that's actually quite special. It really improved the eye autofocus, in particular in the video mode as well. And it really changed how this camera feels when you're using it. It's gone from being something that you know, a little bit skeptical over whether you're actually getting the shots, to something that you can completely trust. I use it a lot for kind of documentary style, kind of talking head kind of videos. And I know that as long as, you know, the camera's focused on the face, 9 times out of 10 it'll go straight to eye autofocus. It's picking up what it needs to pick up. And even in situations where people are wearing glasses and things like that, I've had absolutely no issues with the eye autofocus. And it really has kind of, you know, it was one of the kind of saving graces for this camera that Canon released that firmware update. And I think that's also another strong point for Canon, the fact that they are so prepared to release a firmware update when they've got something, you know, that can really push the camera on, kind of take it to the next level, when they could possibly have held out and just released that in the next version of the EOS-R. But the fact that they were prepared to kind of go the extra mile and help people out, I think is a really good sign that Canon are doing their best to kind of help people with these cameras. So I think that was a real strong point as well. And probably the biggest bonus to these cameras is the lenses. The lenses are genuinely fantastic. I've used all kinds of Zeiss lenses and things like that in the past, real high-end, really expensive lenses. And I've got to admit, looking at these new RF range, whether it's the mount and being mirrorless or whatever it is, improvements in the glass, something is working really well between these RF lenses and the EOS-R, and assumingly the RP as well, but I haven't had a chance to try the RP. But these RF lenses are some of the best that I've ever used. In particular, this 24-70 f2.8, I can't say it enough, is a fantastic lens. Now, they're not cheap by any means, but these are the kind of things that you would invest in, and hopefully you'll get years and years worth of use out of them. So I've had no problem in spending a little bit extra and going for the 24-70, knowing that that's pretty much going to be my go-to lens, whether it's for video or stills. It's worked really, really well. Now, obviously with any camera, there's always going to be some kind of downside to it, and the R does have a few issues that, like I say, I'm not going to bang on about, because things like the 4K crop, it's not fantastic. The double card slot, even though I've never really used the double card slot, I don't see the point necessarily. I record to an Atomos Ninja if I'm filming video, so I always know that I've got a backup with that. And with stills, touch wood, I've never actually had a memory card go bad on me. So, you know, I'm not majorly concerned about that. But I do think that there are a few things that seem like a little bit of a waste, and in particular, the touch bar isn't fantastic. And over the 12 months of using it, I have had a few little glitches and things that aren't great. So if you've looked at the EOS-R and you know anything about it, you'll know that you, instead of using a joypad to move things like the focus point, you can actually use a touchscreen. So while you've got the camera up to your face, you can move your thumb around the touchscreen to move the autofocus point that you're kind of looking at. And what I've found with that is if you're half pressing the shutter whilst moving the kind of focus point, which is a pretty natural thing to do, it's certainly something I did regularly with things like the 5D Mark III, every now and then the camera will just lock, it will just, you know, it's like some kind of bug. And even if I turn the camera off, the camera doesn't actually turn off. I have to go as far as pulling the battery out, and that can be a real nuisance, especially if you're on, you know, a high pressure shoot where you've got to get sort of like certain shots at certain times. If that happens, all of a sudden you know that you've got 20-30 seconds where you've got to fiddle around with batteries and things, and that's been a little bit of a nuisance. Now, I can't say that's true of every camera. It might just be this one in particular, but it's something I'd be a little bit kind of wary about. And certainly going forwards, I would hope that maybe a firmware update or something would fix it. But as I say, could just be this camera, and you never know, maybe I'm just a bit unlucky with that one. In terms of other downsides and things, one of the big problems for me is the frame rates with it. Now, I do pretty much only really use 24 frames a second when I'm doing talking heads and kind of typical kind of client work. But the one thing that's incredibly frustrating that it doesn't have a decent 120 frames a second option. The 120 frames a second is actually limited to 720p, and even though the footage looks pretty decent for 720p, when I'm trying to deliver client work or do something that I want to be proud of, 720p isn't really going to cut it. So I might be being a little bit harsh, and it might just be me being a little bit too fussy, but I just wish that the 120 was actually 1080p on this camera. I don't even want it to be 4K, I just want it to be 1080p. Just so that you've got something that's genuinely usable with it. So that's like a minor frustration, but I'm sure that'll be addressed in the future. And in terms of other kind of negatives with it, I really can't think of any. I really don't have that many issues with it. One of the things that really easily gets overlooked with cameras like this is its stills performance, and its stills performance is fantastic. It definitely is a versatile camera that could be used for landscape photography, for street work. It's small enough to carry in a small bag and things. So it's an incredibly capable and versatile camera that just happens to be a fantastic video camera as well. So I really don't have any problem in recommending it. And that's kind of where I want to go to next. So we all know that Canon will obviously be launching an updated version of the EOS-R, so literally the EOS-R 2, and a more pro level version. Should be around about March time next year, but we'll wait to see what announcements there are. But there's definitely something coming next year. And I think a real good time to actually start looking at buying an EOS-R now is now. So Canon have actually discounted the EOS-R at the moment. This might change when you're watching the video, so I do apologise if it's 12 months later and it's gone back to full price or something. But I honestly think that now is a good time to start looking at purchasing one. The EOS-R 2 will come out, and it will probably be quite expensive when it does, depending on what changes they make to it. So the EOS-R, the original version, will probably end up coming down in price. And I think if you have a look around, certainly look around on some of the you know, other websites and eBay and things like that, you'll probably find one at a reasonable price. And I definitely think they make a fantastic option. So if you're relatively new to kind of full frame photography, or if you need a second camera for film production and things like that, the EOS-R is a fantastic option. But even as a working professional, I don't think the EOS-R should be overlooked. I think it's got so many great features, and in this day and age you really do go a long way to find an actual bad camera, that I think that it really is, it's actually starting to be quite a good bargain, believe it or not. I know it was overpriced when it first came out, but at the moment I think if you can find a reasonably priced one, it actually represents, you know, quite good value for money. So I know the title was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and I know that basically it's not going to be the best camera of 2019, but for me it's been fantastic. It's done everything that I need it to do, and I think that, you know, for advanced amateurs, semi-professional photographers, small video production companies and things like that, there's so many good features about the camera that I don't think you could really go too far wrong. Now, I'll be interested to hear from Sony users, Nikon users, Panasonic, Fuji, whether you think I'm wrong and there's much better options out there. But I do think that the EOS-R has finally gone full circle, and with the firmware updates and the lenses in particular, this is now becoming a really good option for those getting into full frame mirrorless photography and videography. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, so if you want to leave a comment below, tell me how wrong I am, and we'll have a discussion around that, and also what you'd recommend instead of the EOS-R. Also, what are your thoughts with what Canon are going to be doing in the future? What features would you like to see in the EOS-R2? What would you class as a pro level body from Canon? And would you be concerned if they did go to like a 1DX size kind of body? Do you think that kind of negates all the benefits that you actually get from a mirrorless camera in terms of size, things like that? So feel free to have a bit of a debate about that in the comments. So if you've enjoyed the video, please do hit the like button. If it's your first time here, I'd appreciate if you hit subscribe. And finally, and probably most importantly, I hope you all have a fantastic Christmas and New Year. Certainly if you're watching this at the end of 2019, and if you're watching this in 2020, sorry I missed it, but I hope you have a good year anyway. So I'll see you soon in another video.